Hello and welcome to the Embrace Your Destiny podcast. My name is Sandra Dawes and I'm your host. And if you're unfamiliar with the podcast, the Embrace Your Destiny podcast is all about sharing the stories, the journeys of women who have been through a challenging time in their life. And they're here to share their experience, the lessons they've learned, and offer advice for anybody who may be going through something similar in their own life. And today I'm speaking with Sarah Thompson. And Sarah is a coach, bodyworker, and founder of Ready for Radiance, LLC. She has learned the art and science of support, empowerment, and growth through her own journey out of an abusive relationship and into purposeful living. The journey has included extensive training as a coach with highly skilled teachers and profound transformation through bodywork and development as a massage therapist. Sarah primarily works with women who feel stuck in patterns that they know are getting them in the way of shining as bright, standing as tall, and living as powerfully as they know deep down they were meant to. Her work supports integration of your unique picture of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual life to deepen your experience of personal radiance. So thank you so much, Sarah, for being my guest today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So Sarah, why don't you start off with telling us a bit about your journey?
So I think my journey definitely started before I was in an abusive relationship. And that feels sort of like the climactic lesson, like the awakening. Well, this is the bottom of the barrel that I found myself in, was being 2 years in a relationship that was really painful, really unhealthy, and characteristically abusive in the sense that the person I was with was using tactics to really hold power over me. That's for people who aren't familiar with abusive relationship dynamics. That's the characteristic that makes one abusive unhealthy and one relationship abusive versus one being just unhealthy, is that power dynamic.
And what did that look like in your situation?
In my situation, it very much looked like emotional, psychological stuff, things that he would say to me that really hooked into the psychology that I brought to the relationship. Was already a sense of being small or unworthy and finding this perfect sort of person to externally say the worst things about myself that I was most afraid to hear, like trying to connect with an example that I feel good about sharing, just like saying things about how disgusting it was to relate personally to me and what a challenge it was to even just be in the same room with me, how embarrassing it was to bring me around people that he knew. And, just quite...
Very disempowering.
Very disempowering, very dehumanizing, very, it made me question my own sense of self and my own sense of worth and my own ability to relate to other people, which is already a tender spot coming into the relationship. So it was like...
Right. And I find that people with those tendencies, they tend to be far more aware of your triggers than the average person for some reason.
Yeah, magically.
So they know exactly the right buttons to push that are going to, to get the results that they're looking for, unfortunately.
Yeah. And what I've learned about abusers is, or people who cause harm, is that they will push as far as they need to push. In my case, he didn't need to go to physical violence in order to have the control in the situation. Mm-hmm. I never pushed back that far, and there were definitely threats of that verbally that I didn't care to test.
Right.
And so, I think a lot of people have sort of a misconception that, an abusive relationship looks XYZ way, and that a woman would have bruises or whatever and like that. And it's just not the case.
No, it comes in many different forms, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And I feel like the psychological trauma is it takes, bruises heal, and yeah, there's that outward proof of the fact that this is going on, where I think that when it's psychological, you can, I guess, function in life without many people knowing what's going on at home.
It's easier to hide. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's easier to hide. And I became very, that was sort of my greatest strength and my greatest weakness, was how functional I was able to be in that situation, to endure what I was enduring, and also just this incredible will to still show up in school and to still show up at work and make it seem like everything was fine.
Right. So how did you get out of that situation?
Well, at one point, he was driving me to work, and I don't know what triggered that particular argument, but he ended up furious with me in the car. He spit on me, and he leaned over and opened the door and pushed me out onto the road while the car was still moving. And fortunately, I wasn't hurt very much, and I was just sitting there in the middle of the road. And honestly, at that time, I was just, I was so isolated from friends or family. That's part of what being in a relationship like that can do, is just isolate. It isolated me from, relationships who were just not understanding what was going on with me. They were some people saw what was going on and they just couldn't stomach it, and so people pulled away, and I pulled away because I didn't want to continue having difficult conversations with people.
Right. Because obviously, if for the people who witnessed it, they would wonder how or why you were still putting up with it.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand and be with a person who's making that choice.
Right. Yeah, it is a challenge though, because I've seen it, and you want to offer advice, you want to help people to free themselves from that situation. But I think that, unfortunately, nothing's going to happen until that person is ready. I think that you have to get to that point where you decide that this is something that you don't want to endure anymore, and remove yourself from the situation. And people can talk through their blue in the face, but until you find a way out of it, that's the only way it's going to happen and be long lasting. Right?
Yeah, I feel a lot of resonance with what you're saying. And also, looking back, it was important that people did speak up and say things to me like, hey, this doesn't seem good. And even though I wasn't ready at the time to receive it or agree, as I moved forward, I could look back and go, oh, well, this person did give me a warning, and that person did get a bad vibe.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't discourage people from being honest, even though it might not be the moment that I changed my mind.
Right. I think it's about being honest, but not having any expectation of how that's going to be received.
Respect. Yeah. But, I have reasons why I'm in that relationship, and they might not be healthy, but they're my reasons.
Yeah. I think that's the challenging part for the person who's on the outside looking in those situations.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Because as a friend, you want to just pluck that person out of the situation.
Yes.
But it's not your duty or your role.
And right, like you said, I needed to feel like I could safely do that. And it's not always something that me or another woman could feel like, especially if there's kids involved. Fortunately, I didn't have children in the case, but just in the name of domestic violence awareness, if a woman that might not feel safe to get out, because getting out might trigger a bigger response of anger, violence, uproar.
Right. Yeah.
And so safety planning is a huge piece of the puzzles. What happened for me was I was sitting there in the middle of the road, and I didn't know who else to call but my boss, my advisor at the time. And she was fortunately a really sweet woman. And she was like, well, Sarah, you're going to graduate school. It wasn't so much my choice in this particular storyline. It was my choice. I chose to be like, okay, I do need to get out. And she was very strong with me. She was like, this is not okay anymore. You're being left on the side of the road, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because then you start to wonder what else he's capable of.
Certainly.
So you went to graduate school.
I did. That was my kind of looking good cover up story that I could tell, so that I didn't. I don't think I was ready to come out at that point and say, this is what's going on in my life. I for me at the time, I was just having a really difficult relationship, and it was still my fault that it wasn't working out. And I was still in that psychology, even as I left the state to go to grad school. So it was helpful for me to have that sort of out. And then it also created a lot of confusion and challenge as I moved into grad school and I wasn't receiving support to work through what I had just been through. I was just kind of forcing myself through a really challenging graduate school experience at that point.
Right. So now you were in a completely new situation, going to grad school, but you hadn't dealt with
not yet.
With the trauma.
And it was actually sitting miserable in grad school that I started to explore, like, what else can I possibly do? Obviously, landscape architecture is not it for me. And so what can I do? I found coaching, and I actually found a group locally to connect with that was amazing. And I was able to throw myself fully into this world of personal growth and learning to listen to others and hear deeply from others' stories and experiences, and to start to take stabs at sharing my own story, to just even inch into the water of what's going on with me. And it took quite some time to really unpack and unravel. Oh, I was in an abusive relationship. Like, that's what's going on here.
Right. Yeah, because I find, again, from my experiences with friends, is that there's almost a shame in being the victim of domestic violence.
Oh, yes.
Because there's this perception of it only happening to a certain type of woman, right? That she must be uneducated, she must be weak, you know what I mean? And so to admit that this is happening is almost, I guess, a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Or it's being perceived as a sign of weakness, where I think that the more awareness that there is out there, the more we realize that it can happen to anyone.
Certainly economic status and education, they're not.
Yeah, it doesn't know any boundaries of race, religion, age, or anything like that. It can really happen to anyone.
Yes, I mean, I had the fortune of going to a private school. Every day I was told you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. I had those things going for me, and still, there I was.
Sarah, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from this experience?
I would say that, I want to say that a lot of people talk about self-love, and I really appreciate a book that I think it was Bell Hooks that wrote a book about love, and she broke down love into these different components to make it this less abstract thing. And some of the components that she pinpointed were like trust and respect. And I think that I learned, maybe the hard way, to really trust myself, because I can look back in those moments when I knew that something was wrong. And I did have a voice telling me, hey, this is not okay. This does not feel good. And what really exacerbated the abuse for me was to continue to shut that down to continue to not listen to myself and to continue to believe a story that there's not help and support for me, that there's not something better for me out there. And so I think the biggest lesson for me was trusting that there is, that what I'm experiencing is my very solid connection, or like pole star towards where I want to go in my life. And there's no external thing that can guide me more powerfully than my own honest experience.
Yeah, I think that this concept of trusting our instincts and our intuition is something that we often disregard, right? That it's because especially if you're, a logically minded person, right? There's no science behind it. There's nothing like, what is this trusting my gut or listening to my heart kind of thing? And, but I feel like in my experience, when I haven't trusted my intuition or my instincts, that's when I found myself not getting the results I wanted. When I've dismissed it as, nothing, that voice, that those signs that I'm seeing and hearing aren't anything tangible, when I just completely dismiss it, that's when, things go in a direction that I don't necessarily want them to.
Yeah, a disconnected direction.
Yes. And so it's been, for me, just really being able to, quiet the internal chatter and really listen and hear that inner guidance, because I know that when I trust in that inner guidance, I'm led in the right place, or where I ought to be.
Yes. And also it has given me the perspective that, wow, like, we are so amazingly strong and powerful. Like, if I can come through the place that I was at, like the shutdown, fight or flight, constantly person that I was in that very low place, to taking every step of the journey that I've taken to get to where I am now, like, good God, we are amazing, and amazing growth is so possible, like, I'm just not the same person. I am the same person, and I've achieved such huge freedom in my own skin compared to where I was before. And it's exciting.
Right. And it reminds me of that Marianne Williamson. Oh my goodness, I'm having tongue tie today. But where she talks about us being powerful beyond measure, right? That I think that we forget. And when we're in those difficult times, we can feel so consumed by what's happening that we forget how strong we are. And I think that when we move through those challenging times and we get through to the other side, then that's when we can step back and reflect on what we've been through and be like, okay, so if I could make it through that, then let's see what else is possible, as opposed to feeling like life is beating you up.
Yes, to really choose to take these experiences that could be interpreted as one hit after the other, and really choose to interpret them as, okay, I'm being gifted this lesson now.
Yeah.
Even this.
Yeah. And I think that, it's about patience. Again, I feel like patience should be like the word of the decade or something, because I feel like when we're patient with ourselves, and when we're patient with the process, and we just, stay focused on getting to a better feeling and not expecting it to happen overnight, that we do it more gracefully, right? Because I think, though, that so often we want to feel better right away. We don't want to acknowledge the feelings that we're having because they're not nice feelings. And so we want to push
Yeah.
them down and, pretend that they don't exist. But I think that we have to acknowledge them, experience them, but find a way to move forward from that.
Yes, I was just speaking with a client yesterday about the opposite of depression is not necessarily happiness. The opposite of depression is a really rich life that includes anger and sadness and joy and boredom and all of the whole range of human experience. That's richness.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's not, like it asks me, I think, to really take an honest look at what my definition of success is. Is it this life of external indicators of wealth or something like travel and I have this and I have that? Or, when I really connect with success, I think, damn, I learned how to listen to myself, and you can't put a price tag on that.
No, not at all. Sarah, what advice would you give to somebody going through an abusive relationship or just coming out of one?
I think I would say take your time. Take your time to really listen to yourself and what you need, because what you need will be different than what anyone else needs. There is no guide to coming out of that situation. Trust me, I Googled it.
Nobody's put that one together yet.
No, and even if there was, I would be highly suspect.
Right. Yeah. Many paths.
Yeah, there's many paths, and I think it was really hard for me to reach out for support, and I would just offer that there is support out there, and ask yourself what it might feel like. What could it feel like for you to receive support? Could you trust that? And I would also say that, from my bodyworker perspective, like our nervous system going through trauma, like that's a real physical impact. We don't necessarily see what happens on a neurological level, but that triggers our fight or flight reflex. And often that's a pattern of reacting fearfully to life in situations that maybe there's no need to be afraid, but there I am scared. It's PTSD in a sense. And to really shift those neurological patterns, it does take time and patience and just consistent intention and so much compassion. You deserve compassion, is I think what I would say.
Yeah. I would think that compassion is a huge part of it, because you have to forgive yourself.
Amen.
And yeah, because it can be, you can feel like you put yourself in that position, so you're the one to blame. But I think that, definitely compassion for yourself and in time for the person who put you through it.
Well, certainly, I think that the conversation about blame can be pretty unproductive, and that I can look at that experience and say, that fellow was definitely in the wrong for some of the things he did and said. Definitely no question in the wrong. And it feels important to acknowledge the choices that I had along the way, so that I can really learn to choose differently now and to not continue to live in a pattern that creates abusive relationship experiences. And that to me is not about blame. It's about taking responsibility for my experience. And it's a very, very different thing that I do feel hinges on compassion and understanding, like, how come I got into that place in the first place. I was desperately looking for love, and I didn't know I didn't know better. I had ignorance. It's not a shameful thing. It's just, I learned math in school. I didn't learn relationship in school.
Right. No, they don't teach us that, do they? Yeah. It's a process, right? And you have to, take your time with it and know that it will get better and you can become stronger for that experience.
Yes.
Sarah, any final thoughts? Anything else you want to share today?
I really appreciate the opportunity to tell the story. I know that it can be uncomfortable to hear about. It can be uncomfortable to share about, and it feels good to come out the other end and say, "Hey, ain't no shame." Like we live in a violent world, and the beauty of that is getting to choose to sing a song of peace and strength and compassion anyway.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your experiences, and your advice for anybody going through something similar in their own life. And for you listeners out there, if you want to learn more about Sarah and what she does and where to find her, you can refer back to the show notes because all that information will be there. And again, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. And for the listeners, I will see you next week.